So that's not good.
Remarkably, as the last veterans like Tom Spear revisit the old battlefields, they also feel nostalgia. It wasn't all fighting. Canadians were given frequent rest out of lines and were famed for high spirits.
We weren't in the trenches all the time, or we weren't fighting all the time. We had leisure hours, and you went to your duties, whatever they were.
We also have some difficulty in remembering how difficult life was for ordinary people in their regular lives. A soldier was fed, he had comrades, he had a sort of life defined for him. If he went home to work in a mine for 6 days a week under highly dangerous conditions, in a world where for ordinary Canadians there was little leisure and few opportunities for the kind of comradeship the armed forces offered, we do have to enter into the world of camaraderie, of friendship, of unit cohesion.
Yeah, in Canada you often see it referred to as the communion of the trenches. Again, a sort of spiritual reading put on it. And the most important thing for Canadian veterans is that the life at the front, life in the trenches, represented a complete meritocracy. A man was valued for who he was, what he did, not for his education or his job or his social standing or his appearance. If you conducted yourself as a soldier, if you did the job at the front, you were a good man. You were, had joined that communion.
There's been a tendency to confuse Canadian attitudes with those of the British, the utter war weariness expressed by their poets like Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon, who dominate our modern view of the war. But there are key differences. Canadian casualties, though horrific, were far less per capita than those of Britain. That country was traumatized by 1 million dead, and was also losing its sense of imperial mission, just as Canada found its sense of nationhood.
Casualties were tremendously high in Britain. It must have been a profound psychic shock for a lot of British society. And they had the same post-war traumas that we had. But for Canada, this sort of the compensation, if you like, was being able to believe that we had used our contribution to the war as a springboard to nationhood. And that somehow made a lot of it seem worthwhile for many Canadians.
When the first of the 600,000 Canadians left for Europe in 1914, they were rank amateurs at war. But by 1917, they'd evolved into an elite corps of 4 divisions.
And there, for weeks in advance of the attack, officers and other ranks were instructed in great detail on every phase of the coming operation.
For battles like Vimy Ridge, they received meticulous training and had a revolutionary grasp of modern technology like wireless in battle. Keys to success when they captured Vimy in April 1917. Heights neither French nor British troops could take. An action hailed as a national triumph.
Vimy Ridge was won.
I'm not entirely sure that for the men in the ranks it immediately meant a whole lot. They didn't get any warmer when they reached the top of Vimy Ridge. They weren't any less hungry, and the dead weren't any less dead. But I think it means for their officers and for them that there is an esprit de corps, sense of belonging, sense of purpose in being in the Canadian Corps.
Elite status meant Canadians were saved for key attacks, and in the titanic battles of 1918, as the world hung in the balance, the Canadian Corps, along with Australians, became the spearhead of attack. The mere presence near the front of Canadian troops alarmed German commanders.
They see Canadians after Vimy Ridge, and certainly by mid-1918, as shock troops. They see them as a unit which is generally used by the British Army as the unit which will spearhead a major offensive.
We knew we were the shock troops. We knew that. We knew where we were going, that there was going to be some fighting, all right.
But it was a close-run affair. A massive German offensive in the summer of 1918 almost got to Paris. When it failed, Canadians were told to get ready. They would lead the whole Allied attack.
Early in August, the Canadians received orders to move from the Arras area.
On the eve of the ultimate battle, Tom Spear and his brother Will had a quick reunion behind the front.
And we sat in our little dugouts or in the fields or wherever we were billeted and discussed home. Home. We were sure, very sure, that it was going to be a big push. We knew that everybody had been given a little bit of leave, maybe a week of leave, and he had just come back from his term of leave. He said, "I've got something wonderful to tell you, Tom." And he says, "I've just been engaged to an English girl."
The final Canadian-led attack, called the 100 Days, was like nothing seen on the Western Front before. Following very modern rules of combined, coordinated attack by all elements.
You think about battle before you engage in it. You plan it, you prepare for it, you let everyone know what the plan is, and you give everyone good maps. It sounds very, very simple, but it's enormously complex.
The 100-day campaign, breakthrough at Amiens, at Canal du Nord, and then the long advance to Valenciennes and Mons is what largely convinced the German High Command that it must sue for peace. It was perhaps Canada's greatest feat of arms. In just weeks, it helped turn the whole tide of war.
There is no certainty in the summer of 1918 that the war will end in an Allied victory. It may well end in an Allied stalemate. So for the Canadians at the time, the victories of the summer and early fall of 1918 are on a monumental scale. Perhaps well, fully the equal of what was accomplished in the last stages of the Battle of Normandy or in the Battle of the Rhineland.
So Canada's greatest feat of arms, in effect, has been forgotten.
Oh yes, without question, yes. And the people who did it.
By the end of the war, the Canadian Corps was the finest professional organization on the Western Front and the greatest army that Canada has ever fielded.
But victory came at high cost. 10,000 Canadians died in just the 100 days. One of them, Tom Spear's brother.
I was on a wireless truck at a place called Dinant, and I got a wireless message that your brother's been wounded. The next day they said that he died of wounds, being transported to the field dressing station.
Soon after, on the morning of November the 11th, Spear received another telegram.
At 7 o'clock, I was on the desk of the telegraph desk when the message came from Army. The war was over. And I have that message that was copied that day with the Army stamp on it. It's addressed to the Canadian Corps. Time 7:10. Hostilities will cease at 1100 hours, November the 11th. Troops will stand fast on the line reached at that hour.
Exact memory?
The quietness for the boys at the front. Everything was silent. You could pretty near hear the silence. And the elation that it was all over. Now, where do we go from here? Let's get home.
That first November the 11th saw rejoicing, and for many remembrance days afterwards, the triumph was still marked along with the mourning. So Canadian War Memorial celebrated the dead as true peacekeepers who had died in an attempt to end war. Canadian society was annually challenged to keep faith with the fallen. It was later, after other wars showed no end to war, that the day grew so heavy with lament.
Part of me is back there yet, because there but by the grace of God lay I. And I feel that way about it. The least I can do is to honor my brother and his pals and my pals that are still there. I don't know one single Canadian soldier living today that served with me. Not one. They're all gone. I'm very humble, very, very humble. Sad, but proud of them too.
Now, please stay with us. When we come back, we'll have Rex Murphy's view on war and remembrance.
Why we should wish to recall war is, on the face of it, curious or strange. The day is called Remembrance Day. Why we choose to remember is built into the idea of setting aside one day each year for an act of deliberate recollection. Why we should want to recall war, any war. War, after all, is mankind's greatest self-inflicted horror, the scene of death, mutilation, terror, almost unimaginable loss. Why we should wish to recall war is, on the face of it, curious or strange. It is, superficially, even stranger that those who are most observant of Remembrance Day, those who wish most of all to bring the memory of war's pain, suffering, and sacrifice to active, conscious presence every year, are the very people who experience the pain and the suffering, the waste of war firsthand, the veterans. Veterans are the people who were there. They lost friends, endured agonies, were wounded, maimed, terrorized, blistered with 1,000 griefs. Most, by definition, were not high commanders, so the fame was not theirs. They were of the ranks, and the individual suffering of the plain common soldier is not the stuff, with some exception, that endures in statues and poetry. Why then want to remember what was horrible? So many lives lost, devastated, interrupted. Furthermore, why insist on remembering? For it is the first order of Remembrance Day that war and the deeds of war must not be forgotten. Must not. Remembrance Day is very clear on that imperative. We must not, it is a commandment, forget. Can it be the glory of war? We are, I think, long past the days when the facts of combat were prized as the stuff of glory. Millions of people, millions, died in the two great wars of this century, which we remember on this day. Those two wars are not the glory of our time, they are its shame. Comradeship. Battle is truly a great crucible of human relations. All of us have friends, only veterans have comrades. A shared hour in the trenches many times generated a lifetime of respect, affection, and intense understanding. But comradeship is a private emotion, and it is not for that that we have Remembrance Day. Remembrance Day is a public act. It is a civic commemoration. It is when we, both those who were there, who are now few, and those who were not, who are now many, choose to remember war, which is mankind at its most savage and malignant, in the hope that the recollection will at least put a stay on the urge to war at any future time. Remembrance Day is not a glorification of war and its sacrifices. It is a reminder of its dread, its waste, and its evil. The marches past, the memorials, the musters of aging soldiers, the reveries of friends long lost, of the nightmares and nobilities of Dieppe and Normandy, Beaumont Hamel and Vimy Ridge, are commanded to memory one day each year, more to the service of hope than celebration. I think part of the sadness of Remembrance Day is that we sense how thin is that hope that we shall not repeat what we are remembering, just as I think that its true glory is the belief that the remembrance is the only durable shape human hope can assume. For The National, I'm Rex Murphy.
Now, please stay with us. The National will continue in a moment.